Welcome. This is a special Contreras report on American politics. I'm Raul Lowry Contreras. It is August 30th, and today we're going to discuss the Trump-led attack on the November 3rd election results of 10 months ago, and how the lawyers who prostituted themselves for Trump in court are faring. My thanks to a succinct article in Reason Magazine by a former colleague at Reason Magazine who edited my articles in the magazine almost 30 years ago, Jacob Sulum. I recommend Reason Magazine online because they publish every day and provide in-depth articles that are very readable and serve the reader well in presenting a libertarian Republican point of view on current issues and news that you can read and you can't get elsewhere. Sometimes you can get it elsewhere, but not from that viewpoint. Most of you are aware of the declaration by Donald Trump election night with but a tiny percentage of votes counted that the election was stolen from him. Informed people know that isn't true, but even though there is no proof that has been offered to the public through and in the entire court system of the U.S. all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, there are some that truly believe Trump. Helping the lemming-like herd along this ridiculous, unproven path of thought is a group of lawyers whose actions are absolute proof that lawyers' jokes are based in truth. Led by former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, others who made names for themselves through the press that breathlessly covered the legal swarm were L. Lynn Wood of the state of Georgia and Sidney Powell, who practices law in Texas and was educated in North Carolina. She is famous for her declaration that her lawsuit on behalf of the president would unleash the Krakens, quote unquote. Krakens, spelled K-R-A-K-E-N-S. Hockey fans know Krakens as a Seattle hockey team. The rest of us had little exposure to the word until Sidney Powell said her lawsuit would unleash creatures from the deep, Krakens, on the world of American politics and the American judiciary. Supposedly famous for her brains and legal experience, Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood have been totally revealed in a Michigan federal court as nothing as legitimate as ambulance chasing like lawyers. Ambulance chasing lawyers are more legitimate than L. Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell, trust me. A federal judge concluded that Powell and 8 other pro-Trump lawyers who challenged Michigan's election results made frivolous arguments and treated evidence recklessly. A federal judge in Michigan yesterday ordered sanctions against Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, and 7 other pro-Trump attorneys who were involved in a lawsuit that sought to overturn the presidential election results in the state of Michigan. The judge was U.S. District Judge Linda Parker. She dismissed the lawsuit on December 7th, ordered Powell and the others to pay the legal expenses of the defendants, that's the state of Michigan and the city of Detroit, and all but one intervener. She also is requiring the 9 attorneys to complete at least 12 hours of continuing legal education and referring the matter for investigation and possible suspension or disbarment to the appropriate disciplinary authority in each jurisdiction where these people practice law. When Powell and the others painted a picture of systemic election fraud that supposedly denied Donald Trump his rightful victory in Michigan, Judge Parker concludes in a 110-page opinion, they filed their claims too late, made frivolous legal arguments, maintained the lawsuit long after it was clear that no remedy they sought was possible, and presented purported evidence without inquiring into its reliability or relevance. Quote, "This lawsuit represents a historic and profound abuse of the judicial process," Judge Parker wrote. Powell was publicly alleging rampant election fraud even before the polls closed, but she waited until 11:48 p.m. on the night before Thanksgiving, more than 3 weeks after Election Day, to file her lawsuit. Plaintiffs' attorneys waited until after votes were tallied to file this lawsuit, even though the record suggests that well in advance of Election Day, they knew or should have known about the things of which they complained, the judge wrote. This game of wait and see shows that counsel planned to challenge the legitimacy of the election if and only if President Trump lost, quote unquote. Parker says Powell and the other lawyers should have known their claims had no chance of succeeding. Quote, at the inception of this lawsuit, all of the plaintiffs' claims were barred by the doctrines of mootness, moot, latches, and standing, as well as 11th Amendment immunity, she writes. Plaintiffs' attorneys did not provide a non-frivolous argument for extending, modifying, or reversing existing law, or for establishing new law to render their claims ripe or timely, to grant them standing, or to avoid 11th Amendment, that's of the Constitution, immunity. The same can be said for plaintiffs' claims under the Elections and Electors, Equal Protection and Due Process Clauses, and the alleged of the United States Constitution, and the alleged violations of the Michigan Election Code. In short, Judge Parker says the plaintiffs did not cite any plausible legal basis for the main remedy they sought, decertification of Michigan's election results. Judge Parker concluded that Powell and the others violated Rule 11B, that's a federal court rule, by failing to conduct an inquiry reasonable under the circumstances into the evidence they presented, which consisted largely of affidavits lifted from unsuccessful prior lawsuits. In other words, these guys plagiarized other lawsuits. Attorneys are supposed to make an effort to ensure that their factual contentions have evidentiary support, or, if specifically so identified, will likely have evidentiary support after a reasonable opportunity for further investigation or discovery. These examples illustrate how reckless Powell and her collaborators were with the hundreds of pages they submitted to back up their claims. Evidence that Powell likened to a kraken and a fire hose. For example, from an area I am thoroughly familiar with, military intelligence, Joshua Merritt, an affiant, a person who gave an affidavit, was presented as a U.S. military intelligence expert, quote unquote, and a former electronic intelligence analyst with the 305th Military Intelligence Regiment, I guess, or battalion. But he had never completed training in military intelligence, a fact that the Washington Post revealed on December 11th. Even after learning that Merritt never completed any intelligence analyst training program with the 305th Military Intelligence Battalion, Parker wrote, plaintiffs' counsel Powell and Wood remained silent as to this fact. Then there is a story of another expert, Russell J. Ramsland, Jr. He claimed that 6,000 votes in Antrim County, Michigan, were switched from President Trump to former President Trump to President Biden. But the state issued a bulletin well before this lawsuit was filed explaining the user error that led to the miscount in Antrim County's unofficial results, which had been quickly identified and corrected, unquote. Ramsland also claimed that 643 Michigan precincts had improbably or impossibly high voter turnout, including, get this, 781.9% in North Muskegon, 460.51% in Zeeland Charter Township, 215.21% in Grout Township, and 139.29% in Detroit. Even, the judge wrote, the most basic internet inquiry would have alerted plaintiffs' counsel to the wildly inaccurate assertions in Ramsfeld's affidavit. Judge Parker noted the official numbers showed, for example, that voter turnout was 73.53% in North Muskegon, 80.11% in Zeeland Township, and 50.88% in Detroit. Ramsland's numbers, Parker says, were outlandish and easily debunked, and those quotes in front and back of that. Parker also notes that Ramsland, in a Georgia election lawsuit, had presented data from Minnesota as data from Michigan. And, quote, even for the Minnesota locations, Ramsland's conclusions about overvotes were not supported by official data from the state, unquote. That widely publicized episode, Parker says, should have alerted Powell and the others to the unreliability of Ramsland's figures and put them on notice that further inquiry was warranted. Boy, that's a very nice way for her to write that. Attorneys, Judge Parker wrote, may not bury their heads in the sand and thereafter make affirmative proclamations about what occurred above ground, she says. In such cases, ignorance is not bliss, it is sanctionable. Writer Jacob Sulam writes in the recent article that Parker's conclusions about Powell's approach to evidence can only hurt her as she tries to fend off the $1.3 billion, that's with a B, defamation lawsuit filed against her by Dominion Voting Systems, the company she implicated in the massive criminal conspiracy that supposedly enabled Biden to steal the election. American citizens can thank Dominion Voting Systems and federal Judge Parker for smashing the phony Trump claim that those of his lawyers' supporters that the election was stolen. It wasn't, and no amount of legal BS from a bunch of ambulance-chasing-like lawyers can make it so or prove it so. The declaration of political and legal war declared by Trump on November 3rd may have been repeated over and over by former President Trump, and it may be one that many Americans share. However, that neither renders it true nor justifies lawyer exploitation of the courts to further spread the rumor, the lie. As officers of the court, these lawyers had an obligation to do more than repeat opinions, beliefs, and lies, even if they're shared by millions. Something does not become plausible simply because it is repeated many times by many people. Ask the Polish people if they believe Russian communists that it was Nazi Germans who executed over 4,000 Polish army officers in the Katyn Forest in Poland in 1941, or ask Germans why they believed beyond doubt that Jews were vermin because Nazi bigwigs told and repeated big lies about Jews every moment of their waking hours. The big lie is just that, the big lie. Mr. Trump, Ms. Sidney Powell, Mr. Rudy Giuliani, and L. Lynn Wood, Esquire. If you don't believe me, write this name down and sue me. This is Raul Lowry Contreras. Subscribe to this channel and you will be updated. And whenever there is a new episode of the Contreras Report, you can also send me an email with your questions and I promise to respond. The email address will appear on the screen in a few seconds. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.